Hey folks, today's easy open world build is Condition Mechanist. Condi Mechanist is a very strong choice for general open world roaming and solo gameplay. It has great damage, high range and strong options for utility. This build is based off the DPS build I made on the Guild Wars 2 wiki, so if you want to learn more about the basics of this build or double check some information, check out the written article or the complementary video on the DPS rotation. Both links are in the description below. As usual for open world builds, we'll follow a particular priority list for survivability changes, starting from the DPS build for instance content. Changing gear is expensive unless you have legendary gear, so we'll adjust food and trades first. And let's start with increasing general survivability. For open world it can make sense to make a build more forgiving so that you can sustain on your own. Mechanist, however, is a sturdy choice by default, as your mech is a great punch bag that will attract aggro and focus from many enemies. To improve your overall Mechanist gameplay, I recommend to give the article on the wiki for mech controls a read to understand how the controls of the mech, and also ranger pets for that matter, work. On Condi engineers, including Mechanist, both the trait lines, explosives and firearms are essential for their functionality. I do not recommend swapping either of them out. Instead, if you want to increase survivability, I recommend to make use of barrier signet instead of superconducting signet, and use survivability food and a potion of Kaka toughness when you want a more relaxed experience. That will give you a large damage reduction, 10% plus another 12% and 220 toughness. With the gear setup used in the DPS build, we are overcapping duration on burning and bleeding by over 4%. That is why using survivability food including toughness and minus 10% damage reduction is basically free survivability. If that isn't enough for you and you have money lying around or legendary gear, you can swap a few pieces of Vipers out for Trailblazer or Celestial 1-to-1. If you decide to do so, choose the larger pieces, so weapons, chest and an amulet. These provide 40% of the stats incoming from gear alone, so it's much more efficient to start with them. For general open world gameplay with dual pistols, the build is fairly limited in its options to deal area damage and relies on kits to trigger the trait Shrapnel. That is why we're going to make Grenade Kit the primary weapon set for open world. Feels great to spam grenades and drastically increases the overall damage output. Note that Grenade, so the auto attack inside Grenade Kit, will not cast automatically as it is a ground AOE. If you want to spam it, just hold down your auto attack button, so the left mouse button or whichever button you have it on. You need to repress that button after every other skill in Grenade Kit. It sounds a little wonky, but it's very easy to learn. To further reinforce the AoE potential, make use of the trait Grenadier in explosives, which increases the radius of grenades and makes them fly faster. As Grenade Kit becomes the primary weapon for open world, you can freely change the weapon used along with it. Even weapons that do not have native conditions on their skills still apply lots of bleeding via Sharpshooter, and in case they include frequent explosions like hammer or rifle via the trait Shrapnel. This gives you full flexibility and allows you to play whichever weapon you like. In open world gameplay where your mech takes damage, it can always happen that it dies, which strongly decreases your damage and survivability. I recommend saving Overclock Signet, so the elite skill, for cases where that happens. Let's move on to Boon coverage. This build has low native Boon generation and usually one would think that that's a disadvantage. However, this build does excellent damage even without boons and scales heavily with external boons applied by others. Nonetheless, we're going to make a few smaller tweaks to cover Might and Fury if you want to. The trait Sanguine Error in firearms will grant you Might whenever you apply bleeding. With Grenade Kit you will cover a lot of Might this way. If you don't need the benefits from Grenadier, you can also use Short Fuse for full Fury uptime. If you want to be able to cover more boons on yourself and allies, you can use the Mech Frame Channeling Conduits. This will cover some alacrity on yourself and allies and provide better boon coverage via protection, stability and ages. It is a personal DPS loss overall, so it's ultimately a matter of preference. Since we do not cover a lot of self boons, the impact of using Jade protocols on this build is quite significant. They give you free survivability and damage stats, and all boons aside from stability, resistance and resolution on entering combat. These effects can be pre-stacked by using an enchanted Snow Diamond tonic repeatedly when out of combat. The protection from this is another free massive gain to survivability. In case you don't want to deal with the hassle of reapplying the protocols from time to time, you can abuse the synergy between Relic of the Cavalier and Blast from the Sky Scale to apply lots of Aegis, Resistance, Might and Quickness to yourself. It does not have an internal cooldown and applies the boon on every hit of Blast. This also works with any other mount engage when hitting multiple targets. Now in open world you will be dealing with incoming conditions and control effects on your own. Luckily for that you have a very great tool. Shift Signet is a stun break and a condition cleanse with a relatively short cooldown. Make use of this to get yourself and your mech out of dangerous situations, as it is also a nice teleport. This is particularly useful since your mech tends to stand in places where it's not supposed to. If you want another stun break and condition cleanse on demand, swap to channeling conduits in Mechanist. Remember to switch off the auto use on the mech skill too if you do that. Overall, this build is very simple to play, does great damage and has nice utility options. Using Grenade Kit as the primary weapon drastically enhances open world gameplay, and having full flexibility on the weapon to pair with it is very nice. Now that's it for today. Feel free to like and subscribe for the YouTube algorithm. I hope this video was insightful for you and made you want to try Conti Mechanist. See you next time and happy explosion spamming.